Good evening and welcome to Club Book with Alison Espach. My name is Stacy Hendren and I am the manager of the Northtown Library in Blaine, part of the Anoka County Library System. I'm thrilled to be hosting our featured guest and will be your moderator for tonight's event. Before I introduce tonight's guest properly, allow me a moment to tell you a bit more about the unique series that is bringing her to us. Club Book is a program of MELSA, the Metropolitan Library Service Agency, made possible through the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and coordinated by Library Strategies, part of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. Anoka County Library is the co-organizer of this evening's talk. Thanks also to partnering bookseller Red Balloon Bookshop. A purchase link to The Wedding People will be available in the comments section of this live stream feed. A purchase link to The Wedding People will be available in the comments section of this live stream feed. Have it shipped, pick it up at their lovely store in St. Paul, or have them deliver it personally to your door if you're close to the area. One final housekeeping note. Also in the comments, you'll see a survey link. Melsa would greatly appreciate hearing what you think about this club book program. It's quick and it's easy. And another quick and easy thing is consider calling your state representative to thank them for the continued support of library funding and legacy funding. Our guest tonight, fiction phenom Alison Espach, is the author behind The Wedding People, a genre-straddling novel which holds company with the most anticipated and best-selling books of 2024. When newly minted divorcée Phoebe Stone arrives alone to the posh Cornwall Inn in Newport, Rhode Island, she finds herself an accidental wedding crasher. Surprise follows surprise as Phoebe strikes up a unique rapport with the bride, Lila, who needs a confidant every bit as much as her last-minute bridesmaid. People calls it a feel-good testament to the life-altering magic of chance meetings. Early honors for The Wedding People include selection as the Today Show Read with Jenna book club pick, a Barnes & Noble book club pick, and as the #1 indie next pick for August 2024. It has been published in more than 20 countries to date. Alison Espach's prior novels include Notes on Your Sudden Disappearance, a Chicago Tribune and NPR Best Book of 2022, as well as The Adults, a New York Times Editor's Choice. After a short talk by our guest and some initial questions from me, we'll have time for audience Q&A. Simply drop your questions in the comments thread here on Facebook, and our tech manager will route them to me. You can also send a message to Club Book through Facebook Messenger or by email at clubbookmn@gmail.com. So, welcome, Alison.
Hi, Stacy.
Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for that really nice introduction. Yeah. It feels funny to be introduced that way when I'm just like upstairs and uh tucked away in my little office all by myself. So really, really nice words. Thank you.
Hopefully next time we'll be on a big stage together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the dream. That's the dream. We need a goal. Something
Yes.
to look forward to. Yeah. So if it's all right, I'll just sort of start in a little bit with a bit of reading from the Wedding People. I'll start this way just in case anyone hasn't read it yet, just so you have a sense of what the book's about and what Stacy and I are talking about in our Q&A. I'm going to start by reading from pretty early on, the opening section of the novel. And all you really need to know about this opening section is that the main character's name is Phoebe, and she is a 40-year-old woman who, instead of going to work that day, she works as a professor at a college in St. Louis. She flies to Newport, Rhode Island, checks herself into a luxury hotel, kind of spur of the moment, and she realizes in the lobby of that hotel that everyone else in the hotel is there for a wedding. And so that's where the title, The Wedding People, comes from. She's just sort of looking around, observing all the wedding people. She has an encounter with the bride. The bride mistakes her for a guest because the bride has made sure that anyone who's here is there for her wedding. And so the scene that you're going to hear is the scene after Phoebe checks in. She's relieved to get into the elevator, and the bride follows her in there. And this is the scene where you're going to find out what Phoebe is doing there. Like, why did she take off in the middle, or not in the middle, but in the morning, just sort of out of the blue. Um, this section can be a bit dark for anyone who may need to turn it off, or there's mention of suicide, so just putting that out there for anyone who wants to stop listening. I understand. Okay, so that's it. It's about 2 pages. It's not too long, and then I'm happy to kind of just start in and talk about anything Stacey wants to talk about. Okay. Phoebe walks into the elevator and feels relief when the doors start to close. Finally, to be getting away from the wedding people, to be doing something for a change, to have a key to a place that is not her house. Hold the elevator, a woman calls out. Phoebe knows it's the bride before she sees her. She yells like she deserves this elevator. But nobody deserves anything, not even the bride. Phoebe presses the button to close the doors, but the bride slides a hand between them. They don't bounce open like they're supposed to, maybe because the Cornwall Inn was built in 1864. An old hotel has no mercy, not even for the bride. Fuck, the bride shouts. Oh God, Phoebe says. She pries the doors back open, then stares at the bride's hand in disbelief. You're bleeding. The bride holds up the gash across the back of her knuckles like a child and takes the tissue Phoebe offers without saying thank you. Phoebe presses the button and the doors close again. The women don't say anything as the bride politely bleeds into the tissue and they begin to ascend. Phoebe hears the bride try to steady her breath, watches the tissue darken. I'm really sorry, Phoebe says. I didn't realize that would happen. Oh, I'm sure it'll be fine, the bride struggles to say. She clears her throat. So, are you in Gary's family? Gary, I should mention, is the bride's fiance. No, Phoebe says. Are you in my family? You don't know who's in your own family? Phoebe asks. The question makes Phoebe want to laugh, and it's a strange feeling. The first time she's wanted to laugh in months, years maybe. Because how does the bride not know her own family? Phoebe knew everybody in her family. She had no choice. It was so small, just Phoebe and her father, tiny enough to fit inside his old fishing cabin. I have a very large family, the bride says, like it's a big problem. Well, I'm not in your family, Phoebe clarifies. But you have to be in one of our families. No, Phoebe says. I'm not in any family. It had been a crushing realization, one that started slowly after the divorce and got stronger with each passing holiday, until she woke up this morning to such a quiet house. She finally understood what it meant to have no family. She understood it would always be like this, just her in bed, alone, no longer even the sound of her cat Harry meowing at the door. But everybody is here for the wedding. I made sure of it. This has to be some kind of a mistake. The bride says it as if Phoebe is the nightmare she has always been dreading. Phoebe is something going wrong at a time when nothing is supposed to go wrong, because every little thing during a wedding has the power to feel like an omen, like the high winds through the park that flipped over the paper plates and sent a chill down Phoebe's spine on her own wedding day. We should have gotten real plates, she thought, something with weight and substance. There's no mistake, Phoebe says. But if you're not here for the wedding, then what are you here for? The bride asks in a much lower pitch, as if her real voice has finally emerged. Because now in this private space with a person not attending the wedding, the bride doesn't have to be the bride. She can speak however she wants, and so can Phoebe. She's nobody, And the only good thing about being nobody is that she can now say whatever she wants, even to the bride. I'm here to kill myself, Phoebe says. She says it without drama or emotion, as if it's just a fact, because that's what it is. She waits for the truth of it to stun the bride into an awkward silence, but the bride only looks confused. What did you just say? The bride asks. I said, I'm here to kill myself, Phoebe repeats, more firmly this time. It feels good to say it out loud. If she can't say it out loud, then she probably won't be able to do it. And she has to do it. She's decided. She's come all this way. She feels relief as the doors begin to open, but the bride presses the button to close them. No, the bride says. No, Phoebe asks. No, you definitely cannot kill yourself. This is my wedding week. Your wedding is a week? Well, like 6 days if you want to be technical about it. That's a long wedding. Phoebe's wedding was a single night. She had tried not to make a big deal out of it. And why? It seems silly now to have not celebrated something good when she had the chance. But Phoebe and her husband were a year out of graduate school, trained to live on a stipend with a cheap bottle of wine and a nice tree in the distance. And a wedding was such a spectacle, Phoebe thought. Every time she ordered flowers or sampled another piece of cake or told her friends how happy she was, she got this horrible feeling that she was bragging. A week is actually pretty standard now, the bride says with a tone that makes Phoebe feel old. And people are coming a long way to be here. But Phoebe doesn't care. This is the most important week of my life, the bride pleads. Same, Phoebe says. So I'll end there. So that's one of the major opening scenes, and that's where you meet Phoebe and the bride, and their kind of weird relationship, the friendship that continues on from that moment is really so much of what the rest of the book is about, sort of how these two women kind of run into each other in this space and end up really changing each other's lives unexpectedly.
Mhm. Yeah, kind of on that chain of Phoebe and Lila. Um, we come out of this book with kind of this funny parasocial relationship between Phoebe and Lila. They feel like such real people. Can you talk a little bit about how you developed those characters' relationship? And kind of as you went along with your writing, and how did you come up with it as you went along with your writing, or did you have that kind of planned out beforehand?
Hmm. Yeah, I really they formed slowly over time, and they kind of formed alongside each other, right? Like the two characters. Once I realized something about Lila, I would realize something about Phoebe or vice versa, just because so much of the book is spent in conversation with the two of them, right? So I'd make Lila say something and then Phoebe's response, which would be kind of the opposite. Whatever Lila says, Phoebe's the opposite and vice versa. So that was how that evolved. But I think the very beginning, I just had this idea of um, the narrator whose name wasn't even Phoebe. She was just a woman in my head. And um, I, I started writing this book as a break from my second book, which is behind Stacy up there, Notes on Your Sudden Disappearance. I wanted to take a break from writing that novel. I was really, I'd been working on it for years. It's very, very loosely inspired by my experiences of losing my brother when I was a teenager and when he was a teenager. So, it was just a hard book to kind of always be with. And I kept dreaming of writing these like fun, happy novels. Like I would, stop work on my novel and I'd start this other novel. And one of those novels was The Wedding People. And I was like, there's just going to be this woman. She's going on a vacation. I don't know why. She's going to like the fanciest hotel. I just really want to just I don't know. I just want to write a happy, fun novel. Like this was my little dream. And and I thought, a wedding would be so fun. There's this big wedding going on there. And I had to figure out like why the woman was there, and I cycled through a bunch of possibilities of like, maybe this is my murder book. Maybe she's there for, like she's an assassin or she's going to have an affair or I don't know, but none of them felt right. And then I just started writing the scene where she runs into the bride and the bride's question, like, why are you here, was really my question to myself as a writer. And I eventually just wrote, I'm here to kill myself. And I knew that that's what the book was going to be about. Like it just made so much sense to me that
Mm.
that kind of despair is really the opposite of a wedding. It's like what the bride fears the most is like sadness creeping in to her happy, happy day. And Phoebe is this sadness. And I found myself so interested in that dynamic of like sadness meeting happiness in this small space that was really how I formed their characters, just starting with this idea of, okay, Phoebe is sad, and she's bringing that with her. And Lila is happy, 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 and she's like, no one can be sad, like policing every room emotionally. Um, and so they started really as like extreme emotions. And the rest of the book was about like, how are they not just that? Like how is, Phoebe going to grow out of her sadness or start to develop beyond that? And how is Lila going to show that actually she's not happy, 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 and like no one is happy, happy, happy? And that how are they going to bring that out of each other? So I have a hard time thinking of them separately. They're very much a pair in my.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you. I mean, that kind of leads into one of my other questions. Like, when I picked up the book, I was really expecting this happy, happy, fun romp.
Yeah.
And I mean, and it totally was. It was so fun. I mean, when they go meet Frank the dog and when they go surfing and just all the little pieces here and there that are just fun. Um, but I was not expecting this kind of tumultuous personal journey of Phoebe and kind of her to struggle with depression and the suicidal thoughts. But I'm really grateful for it. And I think that did feel very real for me. So we start with her acknowledging I'm no longer normal, wondering when she became good at being nothing, and then kind of a journey away from that desire for death. Can you talk a little bit more about her journey and what you hope readers might gain from meeting Phoebe and Lila?
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you for saying that you thought it was a romp. Because because I actually abandoned the book, like I was working on this years ago and I had that scene and I was like, what are you doing? This is supposed to be your fun book. Like, no, don't ruin it with sadness. And so I was really scared of that part of the book for a long time. It made me I just didn't want to write it. And then I came back to it in a different place and I saw it different. I saw it the way you were describing it, which is like, that's okay. It doesn't have to be happy, happy, happy. I like realized I was kind of being like the bride about my own book, right? I was very much the like saying no sadness, which makes no sense because that's so much of what I love about reading, not sadness, but just honest explorations of real emotions. And
Mhm.
so I kind of finally allowed myself to go there and so I I wanted to do that because that to me those extremes feel so much like what life is. Life is very absurd in that way that everything is both so tragic and so funny at the same
Mhm.
time, often in the same moment, and I just wanted that I wanted that contrast like on every page. Um and I hope that readers, I do hope readers not necessarily identify with Phoebe, but that that Phoebe in the book performs a certain function for all the other characters. She kind of shows up done pretending, you know,
Hmm.
no more
Hmm.
lying, no more pretending. I'm just going to be honest about how I feel finally.
Right.
And that creates a space for other characters to do the same.
Hmm.
And, I've heard a few times, like one of my friends, after they read it, he said, it made me realize how much I lie throughout the day. Like, not like crazy lies, but just
Right.
little lies. Like, how are you doing? Oh, I'm great. It was good. Everything's, you
Yeah.
know, um, just how dishonest he was being like throughout his day. And he said it encouraged him to stop doing that so much. And I don't know if how long that effect lasted. I don't know if he's back at it, but that really touched me. And I thought, yeah, that's exactly what I want the reader to take from being with Phoebe is to feel like a little bolder, just being more honest in their life. She's honest. It's easy to be honest with strangers.
Hmm.
Um, but it's a place to start, you know? Maybe
Right.
that's where you have to begin. And then eventually that honesty can kind of um, come into your, more personal, intimate relationships. Like once you have more practice with just saying the hard thing, you know?
Great. Oh, I love how you just described that. And I think about as Phoebe progresses through the book, you 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 do a really nice job of showing how she recognizes it in herself. Oh, that's how I spiral and go back to how I was sad.
Mm,
That's, oh, yeah, I want to lie, but you can't lie. You're not allowing yourself to lie here. Well,
yeah.
and so many characters, another thing I appreciate is so many characters come to Phoebe, but Phoebe doesn't try to fix them. She doesn't try to, matchmake or solve all the different pieces. She just listens and is honest back. So,
Yeah, yeah. I love people who just listen without judgment. And I think that's sort of what makes Phoebe likable to a lot of the other characters is that they're all in such a high stakes scenario of having to be their best selves at a wedding where they know everyone and these
mhm.
relationships that they're trying to manage um and she doesn't have any investment in like what does she care what they're
Right,
like? So like they know that. They can feel that, right? And
right.
Lila can just start being honest about what she thinks about her fiance um and it's just a relief to everyone. I love it when I find that person, and um and about how it's not just like one turn into being different, right? It's not just one euphoric moment of or
Mhm.
realization of what you're going to be like now. Um,
Mhm.
it is, I only had like 6 days to kind of do this, but I imagine her journey is a lot longer,
Right.
beyond the scope of this novel. But even within this novel, it's like she feels better and then she can feel the darkness creep in again. And it's like, what do you do with that? It's returned. Or you find yourself alone in a room again with the same thought that you had always, right? Um, and learning to just how to navigate that slightly differently. And as she begins to become invested with the other characters, she starts to feel like she's really friends with Lila. It actually gets harder to be honest with her. Like she starts
Yeah.
finding herself hiding things or not saying, and that's such a weird thing I think about friendship. Is like sometimes the closer you get to a person, actually the harder it becomes
Hmm.
to start to say to say things truthfully because there's so much at stake.
Yeah. I think there's one moment Phoebe says, "Can I be brutally honest with you?" And Lila's response is, "Aren't you always?" It's like,
Right.
yeah. We got a question from the audience, kind of tying to what we were discussing. Your discussion of character evolution is fascinating. Is it hard to stop writing when the characters become so real to you?
It is, yeah. Some days it's very easy to stop writing. It's nice out. You're like, okay, what am I doing here? Um, Let me go live my life, right? But when I'm really into it, like this person is saying, right, when feel so connected to the characters. They feel real. It is hard to stop writing. I'm always like, oh, I'll write one more scene. I'll write one more scene. I try to check that impulse actually. A writer once told me to actually try as much as you can when writing to leave yourself in the middle of a juicy scene. Like when you're feeling that flow, actually, feel it, but don't run it to a point of exhaustion, right? Like stop in the middle so that when you wake up the next day, you're right back in that feeling, right? Rather
Mhm.
than returning to a place where you're like, oh man, I really ran this into the ground, right? Um,
What do I do now?
yeah, right. Like now all my energy's gone. And I thought that was really smart and kind of made a lot of sense to me as a writer. So I try to, as soon as I realize like, wow, I'm so lost in this, that's usually a sign that like maybe I should start wrapping it up actually. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Um, I, one of the things you just talked a little bit about was kind of Phoebe figuring out things as she goes along. Something in your book, there are a lot of questions. There are some paragraphs where it's just like question after question as those internal monologues. And I think about, the people at the wedding asking those generic questions. How are you? What have you done? Um, Juxtaposed with those deep internal questions. And then Phoebe also talks about like the openness of the questions of children. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about like the importance of questioning and communicating, both in the book and just how your thoughts for us.
Yeah, yeah. I love questions. I love questioning things. Not always at first, like questioning something can be quite terrifying. Especially some of the questions that Phoebe has for herself and her life. And we're meeting Phoebe at a point where, she's worked so hard her whole adult life, and even like before that, as a student, um, studying books, studying literature, trying to become a scholar, wanting a family of her own, working
Mhm.
towards that in her relationship to make it all happen. And she doesn't really get the things she worked for. I mean, in some ways she does, but it's not complete, and it's like not it's not the way she imagined it. And so I think we're meeting her at that point where she's feeling like, I mean, one of the questions that comes early on in the book, she's like looking back at her whole life and she's like, what the fuck, excuse my language, but that's how it is. What the fuck was that? Like, what was all that? My life, like I did so much, and like, how did that lead me to here? And um what was it all a waste if it didn't give me what I wanted in the end? And what do I want now that I have to want something different? Like I don't, if anyone has had their life sort of driven by kind of like a chief goal or a chief desire, right? That's like really a satisfying way to live. It's very ordered, and it feels like your actions are meaningful because you
Mhm.
know what they're adding up to in the end, you getting closer to the goal. And I think that's how Phoebe lived for 40 years of her life. And now she doesn't have those goals. She doesn't know what
Mhm.
anything means. What does it matter what she does all day? Like these really big questions that I certainly wasn't thinking about at 30, but I was starting to think about them at 35 and 38 and 39. Life just becomes repetitive in such a way that you're like, wait, what am I doing?
Well, and tying that then to Lila, who is the younger and maybe
Yes.
not questioning as much as she should.
Yeah, absolutely. Like just seeing the script laid before her and thinking that's what I want. And uh, because that's what I'm supposed to do. That's what everyone does. And that sounds really nice. It sounds like a dream, it sounds like a fantasy. And so yeah, she's not really questioning. And one of the other big questions that comes up between them is what do you want? And And Phoebe is figuring that out. But Lila is actually just thinking of the question, maybe for the first real time in her life, right? And
Mhm.
one of the things she ends up admitting, I don't think this is a spoiler, is just, I don't even know what I want, right? I just know what I don't want, and I've lived my life to avoid that happening, right?
Yeah.
Which is a very different way to live your life than going after something you earnestly, deeply desire, right? So,
Mhm.
so yeah, there's a lot of questioning in the book. I mean, those are just a few, but I really wanted it to be a book about that and like really examining. I mean, another question that comes up is, Phoebe's like, everyone always tells me I'm nice. And she's like, am I actually nice? Or am I just someone who's always wanted to be perceived as nice? So I do all the nice things, like really going
Mhm.
into that place, trying to be as honest about herself as she possibly can.
Yeah. We have a couple questions that are coming in about kind of you as the writer. Can you talk a little bit about like how you became a writer and got an agent and became published and those a bit of those things?
Yeah, absolutely. I, every time I look back on my career, I feel such a sense of relief. Like, phew, like, how did I make that happen? Because sometimes, becoming a writer, it feels like you're crossing your fingers the whole way. Like, if this works out, if this works out, oh my God, if this works out. And so much of those things you don't even have control over. Um, so but, I think when I really think about it, it's like, okay, from a very young age, I was writing. It was one of the first things I knew I loved to do as a little kid. I would make up these horribly sad stories, and, call them novels. And, everyone always died in all of them. Pretty much like no one survived. Um, because I was like, that's drama, like
Yeah.
there's this little family and they're trying to live their life and then they all fall off a mountain. Oh my God. The and I just love to do that. And my poor parents were very supportive of this sad little hobby. And so I was doing that a lot, and like every year I felt like I kind of wrote some version of that. And as I got older, it got longer and longer and longer. And but it took a very long time for me to even think about becoming a writer, which is crazy because it's like that's the only thing that I like obsessively did. But yet it never occurred to me to pursue that as a career. Um,
Mhm.
just because I think it's so scary to do that as a writer. Like it's not often that we have people pushing us to become writers or artists or actors or, directors or musicians. Like people get scared when you announce that. They're like, oh no, I know how
What's the
much
backup
rejection is
plan?
out there. I
Mhm.
know how difficult. Exactly. Yeah. And so I went to college. I majored in English. I took a couple creative writing courses, and it was actually in those courses when I, started to think about it more professionally. I had a professor who just said to me, like, "You could probably do this. Like you're good, and I like your work." And I mean, it was probably like three sentences, but it just
Yeah.
changed the way I saw myself. And I needed that. And he encouraged me to go to graduate school. And so I applied to get my MFA. Didn't even know you could like go to graduate school for creative writing. Everyone in my family equally thought that was funny. Like they're like, what? Okay, good luck out there. And um, I wrote a manuscript while I was there, which is kind of the point of the creative writing graduate school. It gives you time to work on a manuscript and gives you support to do so. It's very hard, I'm sure, as like lots of people know who write and work a job or two jobs. It's like, really difficult to do that, especially as you get older. Um, and so I wrote a manuscript and I was like, I'm about to go out on the job market. I'm never going to have as much time as I have right now to try to find an agent. So I just threw myself into the agent finding process. And one of the things that helped me when I was doing that was a writer who was in town told me that he found his agent by reading a book because he liked to read. And if a book really spoke to him in a certain way, he would look up to see who their agent was. And he did
Hmm.
that enough that he started to realize that a lot, like some of the same names kept popping up. Like, oh, this agent likes the same fiction that I do. Like this agent has a style, this agent has a voice that they're looking for. And that really helped him narrow down like who you would apply or who you would query. So that really was like the ordering principle for me when I was like, how, it's such a wide world of knowing nothing. You're like,
Great.
how
Yeah.
do I find an agent? Google like top 10 agents, like you don't even know if that's true or not.
Right.
And he really approached it from a different angle of like thinking of agents as readers and having a style and let that dictate who you reach out to, chances are higher that they'll respond to your work. So that's how I found my agent actually through that process. And uh, from there, it really was the beginning of the more professional side of my career. She sold my first book, The Adults, and then there was a 10-year lag. That's when I was writing Notes on Your Sudden Disappearance and The Wedding People, just trying out other novels in those 10 years. And that kind of brings us to today. But it really was a slow, like, if you could just imagine a light turning on as slowly as humanly possible, like that kind of was my journey.
Very big dimmer switch.
Just like little by little, And I feel that way even with this book. It's like I've had two books, and a lot of people think The Wedding People is my first book because they've never heard of my other books. You know what I mean? Like this is a different experience for me, and yeah, they're shocked that how long I've been at it. Like, oh
Mhm.
wow, yeah, you've put in some time before that.
Then they have some books to read while you work on the next one.
Exactly. I feel like they're getting to know me in reverse. It's like they get to my 25-year-old effort, which is the adult. So they're like, okay, yeah.
Excellent. Another question I have is any updates on a movie based on the book? Heard that the book
They
might
are
be adapted
working.
for screen.
Yeah, TriStar is the production company that optioned the film rights, and they are working towards making a movie. I don't know like at what precise stage they're at. I know
Mhm.
they're I've seen drafts of the screenplay and they're kind of working towards getting the screenplay to a point where they want to do something with it, but other than that, I'm kind of, I'm over here in Rhode Island and they're over there in LA.
Oh,
So
wow.
I get little updates here and there, but nothing more than that. But it's been really fun to see it evolve. And another crossing fingers moment. Like I hope it keeps going. I hope it keeps going.
Oh, awesome. Cool. We had somebody share that they discovered your work through the Read with Jenna book club. So, they're working backwards, getting to know
Mhm.
you. Um, do you know how TWP was chosen? How were you notified? What was that whole experience like for you to be at the center of all that?
Yeah. I don't know if this is how it works at every publishing house, but there does seem to be, based on my experience with it, someone who works at the publishing house that, you know, sends out the books, to all the clubs and like all the places it needs to go. And then there's someone, on the Jenna team who's receiving them, and then Jenna reads them and decides. And so that's like my very simplistic understanding of the process from the outside. It might be very different from that, but that's what I could glean from emails. Um, I heard nothing about it at all because editors are very careful not to get your hopes up even in the slightest. So it's like not a peep until it's official. And I got an email. It was like a Friday afternoon. I was at the paint store in line, just waiting to buy a gallon of paint. And I was, like we do in line, checking our phone, looking, and I looked at my email and was like, wow, that is some news. And I felt, it was like one of those absurd moments where everything was exactly the same as it was a minute prior, and people were going on about their lives, just like doing these kind of basic errands. And
Mhm.
I felt like mm, intellectually, I was like, oh, I think my life is going to change. But I can tell no one a year. And I
You'll have
just
to buy your paint.
buy my paint and pretend like nothing happened. Yeah. So it was like really anticlimactic in a way, in a weird way, but inside, like fireworks were exploding. Yeah.
Oh, how fun. Um, oh, so you mentioned you're in Rhode Island. Someone shared that they have been to Newport and wondered why you chose that location, that venue that you did for the wedding.
hmm I chose it for a few reasons. I mean, one was very practical and boring, where I was like, well, I live 45 minutes away, and I wanted to write about a place that I could regularly access, just like I could visit a bunch and it would be part of my life and not some exotic locale I was spending 7 days in and then never again. Though now that I say that, that sounds very appealing. So maybe that'll be my next book. But yeah, but I mean, that's like the kind of practical writerly reason. I have always been fascinated by Newport. I grew up in New England, so that means you spend, everyone in New England is like always 3 hours away from Newport. So that it's like a perfect weekend trip. Your parents take you, and it's like no other place you've ever seen. It's like almost like a film set. So many old historic giant mansions just
Mhm.
everywhere. It was sort of unbelievable to me as a kid, and yet at the same time, I was also really bored by it because I was a child, and I was like, "Why are we just looking at houses? I'm on vacation. Like we're supposed to be like racing go-karts or like I don't know." And so I kind of grew up like always being like, wow, what an interesting, unique place, but also there's something about it that repelled me at the same time. Um, and then I moved to Rhode Island and now I spend a ton of time in Newport. It's like where I go to like get away
Mhm.
from the city. And so I just have a much more like loving relationship with it now. And it just to me is like a city of contrasts. It's so wealthy and there's so much money going to preserve history in such
Mhm.
like a perfectionistic way. And the other side of the coin, like right next to these mansions, there are like these coffee shops that are like serving the latest technology with their, it's like you can have a boat or, not Botox, collagen shot in your latte, or you can have like this life-saving dust powder. We can sprinkle it on, I don't know. Yeah, it's just, it felt so both like so modern and old. at the same time, and I was very fascinated by that. And to me, The Wedding People is such a book about contrasts,
Mhm.
and people wanting things to be a certain way, and
Right.
like Newport wants to be, in the 19th century, right? It wants to be historic and romantic, and yet there's like real life happening at the seams all the time, And so I just
Yeah.
love that sense of like the facade kind of having these cracks um and just exploring that. Yeah.
Cool. And you just mentioned, 19th century. Kind of wanted to touch a little bit about the fact that literature was embedded throughout this book. And, you know, Phoebe is a Victorianist professor. Can you talk a little bit about all like, the authors that you included and kind of that decision to make Phoebe a literature professor?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's probably one of those like, well, I am a literature professor. So, I mean, I was hired to teach creative writing, but one of the fun things I get to do at my college is I get to teach literature courses too, just teaching the books straight
Mhm.
up with no writing component. And it's a different way of appreciating a book, of sort of like living inside of it rather than using it as a model or something,
Mhm.
which is how I think of books in sometimes as a writer. But yeah, so I think it was one of those things I always avoided doing because it's what I was. And then I got to a point where I was like, why? I strongly believe, like, for me at least, that it's important for me to write what I feel I'm an expert on,
Mhm.
whatever that means, that term expert. Like I'm not a Victorianist, so I'm not an expert in Victorian literature, but I am an expert in like being obsessed with books. And I've spent a life in books. Like
Uh-huh.
I think about them all the time. I teach them all the time. I've had conversations year after year about the same books. And I'm like, like that's what I know, like why,
Mhm.
um, and thinking about what I can offer a reader that's kind of particular to my life experience. I just really, instead of avoiding it, because I didn't want people to be like, oh, you're a professor, you're writing about a professor. That was the fear, but I just decided to embrace it and was like, this is what I know. This is what I love. I love to think about books, and I just wanted the character to be in love with books too,
Mhm.
And so, and it's also just coming from reading the same books over and over again. You just have these like long-standing relationships with them, and I felt like, my students listen to some of what I have to say, but I was like, I have other things that I want to say about these books, and this was a way of saying some of those things and really thinking about the the different types of narratives, like moving from the Bronte kind of marriage plot into the modernist Virginia Woolf, like rejection
Mhm.
of that plot, kind of.
Right.
I was so fascinated by that. Not that they were like purposely in conversation with each other, but just that so many women writers are often responding in one way or another to the fact that a lot of these 19th century novels just had to kind of be about romance and be the marriage plot because that's what readers were kind of wanting their women writers to be writing for the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, writing what you know, do you have any background in event planning or the hospitality industry? How did you do your research for this wedding?
Yeah. I have worked a lot of food service jobs, but I did also work at weddings for a bit during graduate school. I was the photo booth attendant that stood next to the photo booth in like 2009. Um, Very early photo booth days for weddings, like it was kind of a
Mhm.
newish thing. So people were like really charmed and mystified by it. And I would be like the explainer of the photo booth. And but I was also dressed for the event because we didn't have uniforms. So I was often mistaken for a wedding guest that was just like sadly standing alone. Like people did not get that I was,
Yeah.
and so that was really fascinating to me. And you're at a wedding for a long time. If you're at a wedding not drinking and not doing anything, it lasts forever. So I would have a lot of, I would welcome these conversations. Like anyone who wanted to come talk to me, like I am all ears. But, one of the things that I took from that experience to write The Wedding People was really that perspective of being the one person at the wedding that is just not there for the wedding, right? And how it really opened people up to me. Like once they found out I actually wasn't a guest, they seemed to be relieved, and that's like really when the conversation started to blossom because it didn't have to follow a certain script like, oh, how do you know the bride? How do or oh, what do you do for it was just like what do you think of this wedding? And they would tell me what they thought, and it was fascinating. So yeah, it was definitely that, watching so many of these weddings, like I'm sure all of those details just like seeped into my brain. And the spirit of those conversations like really were a big inspiration for this book. I also got a grant to stay at a luxury hotel, which is absurd. But when I stopped writing the book years back, one of the reasons was I was like, I've never stayed at a fancy, fancy hotel like the one I'm describing. And so I kind of felt like
Mhm.
a fraud. I didn't know what or how to describe anything. It's like the curtains are so velvety and luxurious. So it's like, I can't do this. Like, I either go or I don't write this book. But it's so expensive when you start looking into those hotels that like one of the ones that like Lila would be staying at. To me, it was unaffordable. And I just was like, well, if I get a grant, I'll go and I'll finish the book. And that shockingly is like what happened. It was a research grant, and I got to go for like 4 days, and it was so weird to be there like on scholarship, like it was just the nightly rate. So
Mhm.
I was like petrified that I was gonna get caught in some elaborate expense. So like everything that was offered to me, I was like, how much is this? Or what's free? Is the water free? Is the coffee free? Is it? And I think they were just, why? What is this rich person? Like that she's so worried about money. What is she doing here? So it was a very interesting experience. But that stay like totally opened up the book for me. That's really like when I really began writing it again. Just because every little thing like became an idea or a scene for the book.
Mhm. Oh, there's a comment just came in. I love that you worked at a photo booth at weddings. You should have included that in your bio in the book cover.
Oh, yeah, it didn't really occur to me until I started touring for the book. And I was like, yeah, oh, yeah, that's why I wrote about weddings. I saw like 408 of them.
Oh, wow. Would you be willing to share what you're working on next? Or are
I
you?
wish I could. I just don't. I am working on a new novel. It's just the plot keeps changing every day. So I fear I can't say anything about it just because it will not be true tomorrow. So so yeah, but I'm enjoying working on something new.
Cool. So, would you be willing to share how have libraries influenced you as a writer and a reader?
Oh man, usually I say this and I can't believe I forgot to say it today of all days, speaking
The
to
librarian must ask.
library and like library goers, users. When I was talking earlier about those little stories that I would write as a kid. One of the reasons I took them so seriously was because my mom t would take me to our public library, and one day she took out a book that was like essentially called like How to Make Your Own Book. And it was like for kids, and it was just like take loose leaf paper and punch three holes in it and bind it with yarn, and it's a novel, and I was like, "Oh my God, we can each make one." It just never I was like seeing all the books at the library. I had no idea that they were made by people.
Mhm.
Those little
Yeah.
things that kids actually have to learn. You forget that you had to learn that at some point, but
Mhm.
you do, and that's where I learned that. And that just knowing that like really gave me this like professional spirit that I brought to writing my novels as a kid. They were books. They weren't stories. They were books.
You
Yeah.
never know.
So that it was like a real game changer. And I was just so grateful for that space. And, that could just be like a random Wednesday, like that, just going to the library and things like that can happen when you least expect it.
Oh, I love that story. Um, we have just a few minutes left. I was wondering if you had any final comments for our viewers, or if you're willing to share what you're reading or what you might recommend, aside from every book that you've written.
Yeah, right. First start with those three. Um, I well, thank you all for coming and spending your Wednesday evening here with me and Stacy. I really appreciate it. And if you haven't read the book, I hope listening to this has made you want to listen or made you want to pick it up. And I really hope you enjoy it. And for those of you who've read it, thank you so much. And uh, you're the reason I'm doing things like this and, able to live as a writer. It's just really amazing to have new readers all the way out, on the other side of the country. So thank you, really, sincerely. And what am I reading now? What am I reading now? What am I reading now? Oh, I just finished reading Heartwood by Amity Gage.
Mm.
Um, it was actually the recent Jenna pick. And I swear that's not how I pick all my books, but it does, you know, they have come to my attention more now.
Now that you know
Um,
Jenna, you've been part of the book club.
now, yeah, now that we're BFF, yeah. Uh, I really loved it. It's about a woman. It's about a many things, but one of the main plot lines is a woman hiking the Appalachian Trail, um, goes missing while hiking, and the other storylines are the other two women who are really kind of obsessed with finding her for different reasons. And so the story is like these three stories woven together, um, and kind of is like a mystery, but it's also a hiking book, and it's very much a Maine book. And so it's got like a lot of like a lot of the things I love kind of uh, combined together. So that was a great one. Um, and if you're looking for something kind of dark and funny in the vein of The Wedding People, like if that darkness and lightness combo, if that worked for you, I really love the writer Madeline Gray. She wrote Green Dot. She, I just read, I read her book recently, and it's just so dark and so funny. I don't know. I just the combo, you don't even have to know what it's about. It was just like that. Her voice really was
Oh,
awesome.
oh, well, I look forward to reading Notes on Your Sudden Disappearance. I absolutely adore The Wedding People. Thank you so much for being here. That is all we have time for this evening. Again, thank you so much, Allison, for penciling us in into your busy spring on this random Wednesday in Minnesota. This has been a virtual presentation of Club Book, a long-running literary series of Melsa made possible by the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Special thanks again to Anoka County Library for the part they played in bringing Allison to us. And before you log off, look for that Club Book survey link, which is in the comments and will be projected in place of my video shortly. Last, consider joining Club Book on Monday, May 5th for their next program, this one in person in Roseville and featuring Minnesota's own David Housewright, who is an absolute delight. One of the Midwest's best known and most prolific mystery writers. You can learn more about that and other upcoming events at clubbook.org. Have a great night, everyone.